the nicknames that it has, the Bridge of Pain, Gladiator School, Torture Island, the name speaks for itself. 85% of people who are on Rikers Island are just awaiting trial. That means that majority of people there are still waiting to be sentenced or maybe even get released. I work for the Close Rikers campaign. We heard of stories, people waiting to be seen for 10 years. When I got locked up for a robbery. You know, I got picked up one morning, it was like 5 in the morning. And you know, my family didn't know their rights. They put the cuffs on you, they put you on the bus, and all you see is like this bridge, and you're like, where are we going? Like, we're going to Rikers, you know, we're going to Gladiator School. C-74 is on the island itself. It's a facility that kept the 19 to 24, that age bracket. Everybody was facing hard time. 3 years, 4 years. When we was supposed to be thinking about prom or, you know, like thinking about picking out our suits, you know, or picking out what colleges we're gonna go to, that wasn't it. I never knew that, you know, when I got incarcerated, that Rikers Island existed for 16-year-olds. At that time, in 2007, there was so many youth. There was overpopulated with youth. I had to go in there and be the most violent so I can be able to survive. And I learned that my first day when a youth put a spoon in my oatmeal in the morning, and what the kids told me was like, you were supposed to swing at him. And I was like, yeah? It's like, yeah, man, you don't let nobody disrespect you. Next time I said, you know what, let me corner him and tell him how I feel. If we feel some type of way, you know, we do what we have to do. And I started slowly learning that if I want to live and survive here, then I really got to lose a piece of myself that I try to hold on, right? The human side of myself. I started learning about the program. We always knew what correctional officers were the one that was upkeeping the program. They could say, well, we couldn't put our hands on the youth, so we needed to figure out how to keep them under control. Basically, it's this like power structure on Rikers Island that had people that fight for these positions to be good. You know, to not worry about somebody taking their stuff, but not worry about somebody attacking them. He'll get more calls to call his family, right? Because he'll take calls from people. If you're not in that power rank, that means you're not having cereal, or you're not even having a muffin. Their commissaries get taken away, their sneakers get taken away. You know, so I had to come in these areas and be the most violent, right? Grab a TV, try to throw it at people, attack someone first, right? Like, you know, get jumped first. Some fights I lost, some fights I won. But number one thing I always learned in jail and prison, as long as you never turn down that fight, you good. Even when I was 16, like the fight club was real, right? Like if you want to get in the team, you want the housing complex, you have to fight them. So sometimes the CO might fall asleep and not pay attention. Yo, the CO's sleeping. Yo, go ahead, go fight. You go right in the back of the dorm, and people fight it out. It been stuff like that. And in Rikers Island, like when I was in C-74, there was always this little corner from where the cameras at one time wasn't able to see. Things like that happen now, right? Like, you know, there's still fight night on Rikers, right? They know that this correctional officer might turn a blind eye, or they might not even do anything at all. I mean, Rikers is falling apart, so it's easy to make a weapon out of anything. Breaking a piece of the heater, even razors, right? Like a lot of times people get razors to shave, and that means somebody got that razor. Weapons are usually never really brung in. They're usually made inside the facilities. Correctional officers, they knew when 16, 17-year-olds, they couldn't put their hands on them. So this fight club was the way for them to, in some way, uphold power, right? You know, like I would have black eyes and correctional officers won't even say anything. They'll say, okay, you okay? Did you win? Did you swing? Did you duck? It's like make fun of you, like, We knew what correctional officer was Blood, was Crip. We knew what housing complex they favor the most. We knew all that. When people don't got nothing to provide, like, the struggle get hard. Tattoos does happen in there. It's dangerous, but people gotta hustle. That's the black market. Selling cigarettes, selling T-shirts. People figure out their way. I remember one time somebody even started a business of selling shebangs. There's like these chips on Rikers Island that was like super good. This person was buying these chips, created an online account, and sold them for like $3 more, because nobody could buy these chips, but everybody loved these shebang chips. You use the money from whoever sent you, or if you're like working for 12 cents, 16 cents, you use whatever you can to go to commissary. People start tapping into some of the skills that they probably never used outside and use inside, right? Like, I remember I used to write at the time with my loved one at the time, I'll have them design the envelope to look cool, right? Like, have some like Mickey Mouse or something like that, or something like really like cartoony, and I'll pay somebody like 2 suits or 3 suits to do it. But then you have individuals who go more deep into the underground or the black market. From there, trying to bring drugs in, right? They're boofing. Basically, boofing means like you're literally throwing the whole drugs and yeah. So there's always like stories of even correctional officers bringing stuff in, right? Like, even when Rikers was closed to visitors, how was weapons and drugs still getting in there, right? I remember when that, we will call it the red alarm, right? You'll hear it all the time because of the youth. Basically, that means the turtles. The turtles are correctional officers with extra gears. Their job is to de-escalate. But that never happens. Every time I have dealt with the turtles, have been them just getting a stick and start hitting anyone. Majority of the correctional officers on Rikers was black and brown, so like I was really expecting a lot of them to understand our struggle and to also advocate for us for a better way to not be in a facility, but return back to society. Some of the things that was done on Rikers when I was younger, or even now, was done by correctional officers. Like, they'll put Crips in blood houses. For what? Like, not every single correctional officer was like that, right? Like, I had a correctional officer who was actually pretty good. His name was like, right? He was a former, I think he's still a Black Panther. When he came into the space, he came with hair grease that you're not supposed to have, some comb to comb out your hair, smell good so the dormitory, the dorm smell good. So there were people who was trying to do the inside work. They gave too much oversee for correctional officers for Rikers Island, that they haven't gave the opportunity for therapists, counselors to be in these spaces. You're hearing stories of people who are correctional officers getting mental health problems because of the issues that they had to deal with trying to survive on Rikers. And that happens, right? It's stressful. They go home, but they're locked up with us. I had to go through that same process again at 19 years old. When I was incarcerated at 19, I was there for a robbery. At that time, I was more gang-related, right? I was a member of the Bloods. I became a part of the Bloods when I was in the streets. People around me was already a part of the gang, right? Like close friends of mine. So I didn't feel like I was joining, like how the Bloods, or how I wasn't joining the Bloods. I was joining my community who was Bloods, right? It's different from the West Coast and the East Coast, right? The Bloods in the East Coast grew from Rikers. At that time, early 80s, 90s, it was a lot of Latinx gangs and a lot of blacks who felt that, we needed to unite. A lot of different gangs grew there. The Treintalios, they call themselves the Patrias. I remember when they was called DDP, Dominicans Don't Play. After they changed their name, they grew from Rikers Island. There are people who turn blood or a part of a gang while they're in prison or jail. And for me, it was a lot different because I was already a part of the Bloods when I was, before I came into Rikers Island. It was so much politics. They keep the Crips in a certain housing complex away from us. We don't have the same lunch. Maybe there's internal gang beef in the facility. At that time, we had too many gang members. We had the Bloods, the Latin Kings, and the Three Intalios. And for me, it was like, yo, man, let's figure out how we can organize these phones so we don't get into any violence. I've been in environments where people fight off that phone. You'll go up to them and say, yo, I want your phone. Like, I want your time slot. And people will fight it out for a phone slot. Always rules that you gotta follow. Make sure you work out every day. Make sure you're intaking your lessons, right? The brotherhood of being around the Bloods. Don't mess with someone in the LGBT community. Don't be a rat. There's always those codes basically in almost every gang, right? The way that they might say certain things to say something, right? Majority of the letters that sent through Rikers Island are read. So they gotta write whatever they mean in coding. So there always been like kites, letters. Let's say they're trying to get the information to someone who might be close to them, and they'll wrap up the paper and make like a square for it to be able to slide between doors. Because I speak Spanish, I will always be able to relay messages faster because I knew Spanish, and I was able to, if I knew harm was coming, I was able to relay that fast to anyone. But like wars can happen between gangs, and it can just like change. Like a letter will go out at one time and what time needs to happen, and everybody got to move. Everybody got to move basically mean that harm has to happen. And it's a fight throughout the whole facility. I think a lot of people don't really know what is Rikers, right? Like they think Rikers is a prison, but Rikers is a collective of facilities that are not just on the island itself, but facilities that are close to the courtroom in Manhattan, Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens. I think people don't understand how old Rikers Island is. Rikers is close to 160 years that has been oppressing Black and brown communities. Richard Rikers was a part of the Kidnap Club and was a judge who broke laws again and again by selling Black people who was not enslaved back into slavery. In the 1930s, it was built by incarcerated people to extend Rikers. Majority of Rikers Island is built on trash. When it rains, it rains in the facility, you smell this like eggy, disgusting smell all the time. You can't drink the water there. You're fighting rats and roaches all the time. I never seen collective of detainees get together to get a mouse out of the cell housing complex. We heard of people dying, get heat strokes, because of how Rikers Island doesn't have air conditions. I remember like a lot of times they'll turn a fan on, and a regular fan, and let it blow all the way down the chair. And everybody, all of us would be like in our cells on the ground, no shirts, in our boxers to at least feel the coldness of the floor so we can at least cool down. And you're in a cell where you're like, I can't drink this water. I got to keep throwing water in my face. There's dormitories and cell areas. So in the cell area, it would just be me. So cells only have one individuals. There is differed from different jails or prisons. But on Rikers Island, you had at least like 20 people, like, one per cell. In dormitory, it'll be like 50 people. And dormitory will be a little bit scary because the bed will be in an arm's length of how close they was. If you want to wake up somebody, you can just reach out your hand and just like tap them. When it talks about being in crowded spaces, the dormitory was one of the most horrible places to be at. The population in 2020 was at 4,000. Now, today is at 6,000. Majority of those times when you see a collective of detainees together is when they're probably going to court or when they're on the visiting floor or maybe for, medical. When I was doing my second bid, when I was 19, I actually came back to Rikers to try to get my cases to run collectively. They was running wild. 3.5 years for the case, the robbery, and then 1.5 years for violating probation. At that time, my brother was a member of the Trinitarios. And at that time, when I went back into Rikers, there was this beef between the Bloods and the Trinitarios. And I found out he was in a different dormitory, but I found out that there was, as they say, money on my brother's head to harm him from the Bloods. And I found out they was having a meeting at a lower library, and I was like, let me go in there and tell them that's not gonna happen. When I sat down, I said, that is my blood brother they are talking about trying to put hands on. They was mad because he didn't want to give some tobacco to the Bloods. That was the moment where I was like, I felt that the change came, right? That gangs are, sometimes they put family against family. And I was like, nope, nobody better not touch him. And if it does get in a situation, it should be a one-on-one. One day, I woke up the next morning, I was like in the dormitory, my brother was in the same dorm as me. It was so sad. Not because I was happy to see my brother. It was sad because my mom's had both of her sons in prison. One doing 16, the other one, trying to finish their 5 years. It was that moment in my life where I was just kind of looked and I was like, yo, it gotta be a different life for me. That meant that I decided to drop being blood. Advocates from the city are just tired of hearing stories of how much Rikers has slowly been killing our people spiritually, mentally, and physically. And it hasn't changed. The only thing that changed is that the youth are not on Rikers. Rikers has become more violent. I turn on the TV like everyone else and I hear about somebody losing their life on Rikers. I tear up just like them. I tear up for their family because I know that, I could have been one of them. A lot of people who are going to Rikers Island are individuals who have mental health problems, who are poor, can be able to pay their bail, and are individuals who are coming from communities that are poor, over-incarcerated, and over-policed. When you say you survive Rikers, that's a real thing, right? Because even now, since 2020, close to 30-something deaths. I mean, it's gonna keep going up. In 2020, some of the legislation was introduced and passed was something called the Khalif Law. Khalif Browder was one of the most knowledgeable individuals who experienced Rikers as a youth and started speaking about it. I just got lost with Khalif Browder because I think a lot of times when we think about Khalif Browder and everything that he kind of went through, getting abused by correctional officers, and that one hit us the most. The Khalif Law really got the population from where it was 20,000 to the 4,000. But a lot of that right now that has been growing is because of broken window policing, right? I think because of the Khalif Law, when we went up to Albany, passing speedy trial, discovery law, and bail reform. The bail reform issue was you had people in there, they was in there for maybe shoplifting, and their bail be $5,000. They'll keep pushing his court date back, and they'll use the method of keeping you incarcerated on Rikers until you give up and cop out, right? Or take whatever they're trying to give you. And that's a tactic that also gets used. What we're also seeing is the population is growing because resources are declining. the resources that were needed to fully provide Rikers Island to the next chapter of closing was not happening. I think what set me to the path on Rikers is poverty. When people don't understand how poverty impacts you, when I was very young, me and my mom, we was homeless. I think for me, I get traumatized knowing that, right, and experiencing that with my moms, and then growing up, seeing people around you being in the street. 8 or 9 years old, I was already out in the neighborhood trying to figure stuff out. And 14, 15 years old, started getting harassed by police. Even being so young, walking down the street from middle school, from elementary, imagine you getting thrown on a wall by this big police officer who's like 6'3", 200 pounds, and you're just a kid. My brother was incarcerated. He was incarcerated for 16 years. And my uncle was incarcerated for around 7.5 years. But it's not just them. Most of my family been locked up all the time. And I grew up to be a man too early. Being tried as an adult meant that the judge doesn't see me as a youth. That it doesn't matter if I was 16, 120 pounds, that he sees me as someone who's a grown man. I think I regret just, the violence, right? It's hard, right? Because you leave these spaces, you still got to look yourself in the mirror. I'm 32. I've been in the system for 14 years. What I mean in the system, that means in jail, prison, under some type of parole, probation, supervision. And, I'm 32, so this past 2 years been my first 2 years to being free. It feels really good. Not reporting to anyone or, being able to know I'm done, In 2015, when I came home, I worked for Drive Change, basically a food truck that it hired formerly incarcerated youth. They got involved in a lot of social justice work, right? They help people out to also figure out what do they want to do further in their, in their life. And for them, they noticed that I was always a good speaker. You need to get involved with campaigns. So the campaign is called the Campaign to Close Rikers. They're led by an organization called Freedom Agenda. And their goal was basically to keep continuing the organizing until it finally closes. The city has closed some facilities on Rikers and facilities that are part of Rikers, like the Brooklyn facility, C-74. I can't wait till 2027 because I'll be right there, right next to the bridge, trying to collect a brick